On Tuesday, the Chargers released their final 53-man roster, and although there might be a couple changes here or there once people get claimed off of waivers and everything, it seems for the most part that this final cut-down roster will stick to being quite similar. Now, on Tuesday, the Chargers cut this roster down from about 80-some players down to a 53-man roster. And even with some of these players getting released, we may still see them return to a practice squad. So just because a player got released doesn't mean they won't stay with the team and potentially play in games if bad things were to occur. But first, let's remember that these men that are playing this game and have been released are losing jobs and losing money because of it, and they're chasing their dreams, trying to make a roster in the NFL. So let's not celebrate at these guys getting cut, but let's still take a look at some of the players that were cut, the thoughts on their releases, what this means for the team, as well as some surprise players that maybe stayed with the team that we might have expected to leave. But if you enjoy this content, please like and subscribe to this channel. It means the world to me, and I'm trying to reach subscribers before the end of the year, and I cannot do that without your guys' help. But let's not waste any more of your time. Let's get right into this. And, let's just dig right into the guys that were cut. So, for some of you guys that you've probably watched videos like this already that released yesterday, having today been Wednesday, we're likely to see some people get signed, moved around, and there's some reports that the Dolphins running back that was released could potentially join the Chargers, but we have not seen any official statements on that matter. So, let's look at the guys that have been cut, some of the surprise guys that stayed with the team, and just kind of analyze this. And then maybe in a different video, we'll look at the final 53-man roster and talk about who is going to get the nod at the starting position, what depth means, why guys were kept over other guys. But let's start with Christian Covington first, who was released and not waived as he was on a long-term contract and a veteran. Covington likely will find an early home, having been a starter in the league and playing solid last year with 52 tackles on the year for the Chargers. Covington was released to allow for Brendan Fiocco to take his roster spot and, see some time, as Fiocco has looked very good last year as well as this year in slowing down the run defense, which is something that the Chargers have focused on immensely this year. Now, one kind of surprise waiver person that I think a lot of people were expecting to potentially make this roster now, even with a very solid wide receiver core, is Michael Bandy. Sadly, Michael Bandy was waived by the Chargers. Having balled out for the Chargers in the preseason, he is likely to be claimed nearly immediately and not make it to the Chargers practice squad, which is something sad to see, as not only was his route running good, his hands were good, but he was also able to create some separation, even though he's not incredibly fast. Bandy finished 7th in the entire league in the preseason for receiving yards with 172 in just 3 games, which is extremely solid to see for a guy, and it does sadden me to see him be released from the team. But with a wide receiver core that's already so full, with Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Joshua Palmer, Jalen Guyton as your speed guy, as well as DeAndre Carter, who will be a return man, as well as a wide receiver, it does make sense that a guy like Michael Bandy would not make the final cut for the roster. Now, another guy that maybe isn't a huge surprise, but does kind of lean me to some other thoughts and guys that were kept on the roster, is the fact that Jamal Davis II was surprisingly waived. I expected him to stay on the roster as a backup off the edge, opposite of Chris Rumph for backup like Joey Bosa or Khalil Mack. He did play pretty solid, and he looks very strong, very fast. He looked to be playing very well in the preseason, but he was still waived. And he is still very young. I expect him to make the practice squad and be, not claimed right away in the waiver. Hopefully make the practice squad for the Chargers and still be useful. But as we'll notice here in a little bit when we move on to surprise keep candidates, I think there is a key reason why Jamal Davis wasn't kept so that someone else could fill that role. Another, maybe not surprise, as I think we all kind of expected it, was Gabe Neighbors. Having been a spectacular special teams player and the roommate to Justin Herbert, one of the Brisket boys, Neighbors' loss may have been more emotional than some of the other losses for this team, and may have been more of a locker room loss than a on the field loss when you take a look at who will be taking his place. But with Xander Horvath looking good in all downs, receiving, blocking, and rushing, as well as an ability to play good in special teams, it kind of makes sense for Neighbors to be freed from this team, even if he was one of the top performers on special teams for the Chargers. I expect the potential for him to land on the practice squad, but I could also see him getting re-signed, as he was a very serviceable fullback for the Chargers when he was with them. Maybe some other team would need a guy like him. Now, the next, not surprised, but guy that was cut, likely makes it on the practice squad, is Joe Reed. After being drafted by the Chargers to be a speed guy, he's still yet to touch the field for multiple games in a season. With Palmer and Guyton both playing at important levels, at improved levels in the preseason, it's clear that the team doesn't need another wide receiver. Also, the fact that Jalen Guyton can be a speed guy for you kind of removes the value of Joe Reed's speed. And last year, he did get the nod to potentially make the roster over guys like Tyron Johnson, but he ends up getting injured, missing practically the whole season after game one, and the team still just moved on without him. And with the improvement of Guyton and Palmer and DeAndre Carter coming in for the special teams, as well as looking very good in the practices, it seems like Joe Reed isn't a guy that this team no longer needs. Now, those are kind of the major releases that this team did have, but let's still look at some of the other names, as it is important to acknowledge all of these releases. A couple other guys here, we have Zach Bailey, who was a tackle, only a couple years in the league, didn't see much playing time. This was no big surprise, especially with the improvement at the rest of the line, with a lot of guys that can move around. You have Storm Norton, who will likely be that swing tackle, which removes the need for Zach Bailey, as well as you have Will Clapp, who could probably bounce out if you needed him to, and just plenty of different options for this team on the O-line. For the other O-line, you had Foster Sarrell, who also got released, but that's another tackle. There was really no tackles that happened to be released. And the next up, you have Michael Bandy, as mentioned before. Trevon Bradford, who is a rookie wide receiver out of Oregon. We haven't seen much of anything for him, and I don't expect him to make this team anytime really soon. Maybe he makes it on the practice squad because he is a rookie. We also have Andrew Brown for the D-line. Not much to see there. Letty Brown, running back. That's something we're going to cover here in a second. This team already has plenty of running backs. You don't need another one in Letty Brown. Cole Christensen at the linebacker position, as well as Jamal Davis and Mickey Egbulia. Said his name probably wrong. There's three linebackers that this team really doesn't need, as well as Carlo Kemp lower on the bottom, and Tyreek Maddox-Williams. Plenty of linebackers ended up not making the cut for this team, but you already have Drew Tranquil, you already have Kenneth Murray, you have Kyle Van Noy that's able to kind of play both positions here, and there's plenty of options for this team at that linebacker position that you don't need a bunch of young guys fighting for a role on this team at the linebacker spot. You also got a couple of DBs in here like Ben Luca, you have Kaman Hall, which I didn't expect to make the final roster, but he kind of looked like he improved a little bit after his first year. Michael Joquette, just a couple cornerbacks here, nothing too surprising outside of one final one. Maybe not a surprise, but a guy that I think could see a nod from another team, and that's Mark Webb Jr. He's looked very good, versatile when he was on the field. I could see the possibility of him getting claimed off waivers and not making it to the practice squad. A couple other last names here to mention: Jason Moore Jr., wide receiver, Kevin Marks, running back, Raheem Laner, safety. And one thing here that we're going to cover real quick is, and the tight ends, all of them that got released, they have extremely tough names. We have Hunter Campmora, tight end released, Eric Kromanoke, tight end that was released, as well as Sage Surratt, another tight end that was released. Although Sage was released due to injury, there's three tight ends that you had released from the Chargers. And as we move on to a thing right here and surprise keep candidates, a thing that I want to look at, there's some of these players that I think is surprising that you keep them. One thing that I think is kind of surprising that you're releasing is I think you have 3 tight ends total on this roster in total. And although maybe you see a guy like Xander Horvath jump out there, things like that, it's a little bit surprising you only have 3 tight ends on this roster, as this team has been known to run 3 tight end plays a decent amount of time. And if you see one guy go down, such as, knock on wood, Donald Parham, who had an injury last year and seemed to have a little bit of injury early on in training camp, now you're down to 2. Now you got to go sign somebody. So the fact that the Chargers released 3 tight ends, a little bit questionable here. But some surprise keep candidates. Let's start with the most obvious, and that's being Jerry Tillery. For a lot of people, I think we expect him to get cut, including myself, with what he has brought to this team in recent time. Having been the Chargers' first-round pick in 2019, he's given a lot more leeway than others before that were cut because he was a first-round pick for the Chargers. Last year, he did have career-high tackles and sacks at 51 and 3.5, but even with these improved stats, it kind of feels a little bit forced to keep him with the roster that is having these new additions like Austin Johnson, Sebastian Joseph Day, and Otito Ogbonnia. There's 3 guys that are playing the exact same position as Jerry Tillery that were kept. But here's the reason I think that he was kept. And as mentioned before, Jamal Davis' second was released, and now you only have one backup edge behind Bosa and Mack. And I think that's kind of where Jerry Tillery will slide in here. I could see him running as the backup edge since the Chargers only kept 3. And although Kyle Van Noy was brought in to do that, it seems like he's been doing very good at linebacker position and will likely start there, which means that you move Jerry Tillery, who is good in the pass rush but not so good in the run defense. Bring some pass rush when you need Bosa and Mack to take some rest. Now you got a guy that can still pass rush off the edge. I think that's kind of where Jerry Tillery slides into this thing, and I wouldn't be too surprised if he starts looking a lot better than maybe we first all expected. The next thing here, although it's in the surprise keep candidates, is not too big of a surprise, as Tom Telesco and Staley talked about this, and that's keeping 3 quarterbacks. Obviously, you have Justin Herbert, but it was expected for the Bolts to keep 3 quarterbacks, but it still feels like a waste of space in a way. Although Easton Stick could likely be a starter on some younger QB-needy teams, and Chase Daniels is a great game manager, it feels useless to keep both for the potential of a starting job. Now, potential, which means circumstances unfolding that we will not speak aloud. But even with a starting role opening potentially, hopefully not, I don't think either quarterback could really carry the Chargers through the playoffs, so it seems irrelevant to hold on to 2 backup quarterbacks when you could open a role for maybe somebody else to bring in. Now, the question may arise, who do you bring in instead? And that could be up for debate. I think the most likely would be Jamal Davis or Michael Bandy or someone else that gets freed up in all this waving from other teams. The fact is, I think keeping both these guys, although the safer option, isn't maybe the smartest option for keeping a competitive roster with lots of depth. Now, the next thing here is the fact that the Chargers kept 5 running backs and are looking at more running backs that have been waived. And let's kind of mention this. Xander Horvath is a fullback, but I slid him into the running back role because it kind of runs the same thing nowadays in the league. With Spiller currently injured, keeping 4 others is a fair choice, but the fact is that Spiller will likely return very soon, if not week 1, which means that you are back to 5 running backs when Spiller returns. With Kelly's improvement and Spiller looking very solid, I think keeping those is a very good option, as well as Austin Eckler, obviously at your starter, and Xander Horvath at your fullback, but we're kind of leaving one name out of here, and that's Larry Roundtree, who was kept on this roster as that 5th running back. And although he looked solid for the Bolts last year, it just seems like he's no longer needed for this team. I could see him getting very serviceable minutes as that backup, or maybe stepping up and being a starter on a different team since he is still young. I just don't think that the Chargers need him on this roster. Now, with all that being said, going through the people that were released, talking about maybe some surprise keep candidates, and bringing up the fact that this is not the final, as there might be some other teams that waive somebody that the Chargers bring in, What are your guys' thoughts on this? Is there someone that you wish wasn't waived? Is there someone that you think should have been in there? Replace? But let's remember something, that these are their jobs. Let's not be too harsh on anybody, because this is how they make their money. And you don't want to tear anybody down that was released, even if you think they deserved it or not. But if you enjoy this content, please like and subscribe. It means the world to me. As I said at the top of the show, I'm trying to reach subscribers before the end of the year, and I cannot do that without your guys' help. But as always, I hope it touched them today. Hope it made you smile. Hope it made you laugh. That something's really important to me. It affects them else today in a great way, because every single day can be a great day if we all just put in the effort. And as always, you guys all be safe out there.
But something deep inside won't let me